Isabella Hartford had always been the perfect daughter. At 23, she knew exactly how to smile at charity events, which fork to use at fancy dinners, and how to make small talk with boring politicians. Her father, Senator James Hartford, loved showing her off at every social gathering in Boston. She was his prize, beautiful, educated, and well-behaved. But Isabella was tired of being perfect all the time. The annual charity gala at the Ritz-Carlton was supposed to be just another boring evening. Isabella wore her emerald green silk dress, the one that cost more than most people made in a month. She smiled and nodded as wealthy donors talked about their latest vacation homes and expensive art collections. That's when she met Richard Pemberton. Richard was everything her father would hate: charming, reckless, and married to someone else. He had dark eyes that sparkled with mischief, and a smile that made Isabella forget all about proper behavior. When he asked her to dance, she should have said no. When he suggested they step outside for some fresh air, she should have made an excuse. When he pulled her into the garden's hidden alcove and kissed her under the moonlight, she definitely should have walked away. Instead, she kissed him back. The flash of the camera caught them both by surprise. In that split second, Isabella's perfect life shattered like expensive crystal hitting marble floor. The photographer worked for one of Boston's biggest newspapers. By morning, the picture was everywhere. Senator Hartford's daughter locked in a passionate embrace with Senator Mitchell's married son. The headlines were brutal: Political Princess's Secret Affair and Hartford's Daughter Caught in Love Triangle. Isabella's mother, Catherine, took to her bed with what she called nervous exhaustion. Her father paced his study like a caged tiger, his political career hanging by a thread. The phone rang constantly with reporters wanting comments and political allies expressing their concerns. 20 years I've built my reputation, Senator Hartford told Isabella, his voice shaking with anger and disappointment. 20 years of service, of building trust with the voters, and you destroyed it all for what? A moment of excitement with that worthless boy? Isabella tried to explain, but her father wasn't listening. He was already thinking about damage control, about saving his upcoming run for governor. The polls were dropping fast. His campaign manager suggested he consider withdrawing from the race entirely. That's when Senator Hartford remembered his old Army buddy, Tom Mackenzie. Tom owned a huge cattle ranch out in Montana. They had served together in Vietnam and stayed in touch over the years. Tom had mentioned that his son Jake needed to get married soon, something about his grandfather's will requiring him to be married before his 30th birthday to inherit the ranch. It seemed like a perfect solution to Senator Hartford. Get Isabella out of Boston until the scandal died down, and help an old friend's son at the same time. What he didn't tell Isabella was that Tom had been just as desperate to find Jake a wife as Hartford was to hide his daughter. "You're going to Montana," Senator Hartford announced one evening over dinner. "You'll marry Tom Mackenzie's son and stay there until this mess blows over." Isabella laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Marry a stranger? Daddy, this isn't the 1800s. It's either that or I disown you completely," her father said, his voice cold as winter. "The choice is yours." Isabella realized he was serious. Her perfect world, her trust fund, her comfortable life, everything depended on doing what her father wanted. She had never worked a day in her life, had never had to worry about money or where her next meal would come from. "How long?" she whispered. "Until I'm elected governor and the scandal is forgotten. Maybe a year, maybe 2. Her mother finally spoke up from across the table. "It's for the best, dear. Think of it as an adventure. Montana has beautiful mountains," Isabella wanted to scream. An adventure? Getting shipped off to marry a complete stranger felt more like a prison sentence. Within a week, her bags were packed. Her father's assistants had handled everything: the travel arrangements, the legal papers, even buying her what they called appropriate clothing for ranch life. Isabella had never owned a pair of jeans in her life. Standing on the platform at Boston South Station, Isabella felt like she was attending her own funeral. The train that would take her west sat waiting like a metal beast ready to swallow her whole. Her mother hugged her goodbye, whispering apologies and promises that it wouldn't be forever. Her father shook her hand like she was a business associate. "Make the best of it, Isabella, and try not to cause any more scandals." As the train pulled away from the station, Isabella watched Boston disappear behind her. Everything she had ever known, everyone she had ever loved, was getting smaller and smaller until it vanished completely. She was heading toward a new life with a man she had never met, in a place she had never been, doing work she had never imagined, all because of one kiss that had felt like freedom, but turned out to be a chain around her ankle. The train carried her west through the night, each mile taking her further from her old life and closer to whatever waited for her in Montana. Isabella pressed her face against the window and tried not to cry. She was being punished for wanting something real, something exciting, something that made her feel alive. But maybe, just maybe, her punishment might turn into something unexpected. After all, she had never believed in fairy tales. But she was about to find out that sometimes real life could surprise you in the most amazing ways. The train whistle echoed across the dark countryside, carrying Isabella toward a destiny she never could have imagined. The train ride to Montana felt like traveling to another planet. Isabella had spent 3 days watching the landscape change from busy cities to endless fields, from tall buildings to wide open spaces that seemed to go on forever. By the time they reached Billings, she felt like she had been traveling for weeks. Her fancy traveling dress, which had seemed so appropriate when she left Boston, now felt completely wrong. The dark blue silk with its pearl buttons and perfect fit looked ridiculous next to the practical clothes worn by other passengers heading west. Isabella caught glimpses of herself in the train window and barely recognized the worried-looking woman staring back. When the train finally stopped at Billings Station, Isabella's heart started beating so fast she thought it might jump out of her chest. This was it. No going back now. The station was nothing like the grand terminals in Boston. It was a simple wooden building painted yellow, with a covered platform that provided shade from the blazing Montana sun. Everything looked dusty and well-worn, like it had been there forever and would stay there forever. Isabella gathered her bags and stepped onto the platform, her high-heeled shoes clicking against the wooden boards. The sound seemed too loud, too fancy for this place. She looked around nervously, wondering how she would even recognize the man she was supposed to marry. That's when she saw him. Jake Mackenzie was leaning against a fence post about 20 feet away, and Isabella's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't at all what she had expected. She had pictured someone older, maybe with a big belly and rough manners. Instead, she found herself looking at a man who made her forget how to think straight. He was tall, probably 6 feet or more, with broad shoulders that filled out his worn denim shirt perfectly. His dark brown hair was a little too long and looked like he had been running his fingers through it. When he pushed his cowboy hat back on his head, Isabella could see his face clearly, and her heart did something strange and fluttery. He had strong features, a straight nose, a jaw that looked like it was carved from stone, and the kind of deep tan that came from working outside every day. But it was his eyes that really got to her. They were the color of coffee with just a touch of cream, and when he looked at her across that dusty platform, Isabella felt like she was falling down a very deep well. Jake had been watching the train passengers get off, looking for the fancy Boston lady his father had told him about. He was expecting someone stuck up and helpless, someone who would complain about everything and probably cry a lot. When he spotted Isabella standing there in her perfect dress with her perfect hair, he got ready to deal with exactly that kind of woman. But then their eyes met, and Jake forgot what he was thinking about. The woman looking back at him wasn't what he had expected at all. Yes, she was obviously from money. Her clothes and the way she carried herself made that clear. But there was something in her green eyes that surprised him. She looked scared, sure, but also determined. Like she was ready to face whatever came next, even if it terrified her. Isabella was beautiful in a way that made Jake's mouth go dry. Her auburn hair was pulled back in some fancy style that probably had a name he wouldn't know, and her skin looked like she had never spent a day in the sun. She was delicate and elegant, like something that belonged in a museum rather than on a working ranch. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the platform. Other passengers moved around them, collecting bags and greeting family members. But Isabella and Jake were frozen in place, both trying to process what they were seeing. Finally, Jake pushed away from the fence post and walked toward her. Each step brought him closer to this woman who was supposed to become his wife, this stranger who had traveled halfway across the country because of some arrangement between their fathers. Miss Hartford? His voice was deeper than Isabella had expected. with just a hint of a Western accent that made her name sound different than it ever had before. "Yes," she managed to say, though her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "You must be Jake Mackenzie." "That's me," he said, stopping a few feet away from her. Up close, he was even more impressive. Isabella had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes, and when she did, she felt that strange, fluttery feeling again. Jake was having his own problems. This close to Isabella, he could smell her perfume, something light and flowery that was completely different from anything he had ever encountered on the ranch. She was even prettier than he had thought from a distance, with skin so smooth it looked like porcelain and lips that were the perfect shade of pink. "So," Jake said, suddenly feeling awkward. He had never been good with fancy women, and this one was fancier than any he had ever met. "How was the trip?" "Long," Isabella said, trying to smile. "Very long." Jake nodded toward her bags. "Is this everything?" Isabella looked at her 2 large suitcases and her smaller travel bag. In Boston, this would have been considered packing light. Here, looking at Jake's simple clothes and practical boots, it seemed like way too much. "Yes, this is everything," she said. Jake picked up both suitcases like they weighed nothing, which impressed Isabella more than she wanted to admit. "The wagon's over here," he said, nodding toward the street. Isabella followed him, trying not to stare at the way his shoulders moved under his shirt, or how his jeans fit him perfectly. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, a punishment that would get her out of her father's way until his political problems were solved. She wasn't supposed to feel attracted to this man. But as Jake loaded her bags into the back of a simple wooden wagon pulled by 2 beautiful horses, Isabella couldn't deny what was happening to her. Every time he looked at her, every time he spoke in that deep, warm voice, she felt something she had never experienced before. It wasn't just that he was handsome, though he certainly was. It was something deeper than that. He seemed solid and reliable in a way that the men in Boston never had, like he was someone who could be counted on, someone who meant what he said and did what he promised. "Ready?" Jake asked, offering his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. Isabella looked at his outstretched hand, tanned and calloused from hard work, and realized that taking it would be the first step into her new life. Once she climbed onto that wagon, there would be no going back to Boston, no returning to her old life until her father decided she had been punished enough. She took his hand. The moment their skin touched, Isabella felt a jolt of electricity that ran all the way up her arm. Jake felt it too. She could tell by the way his eyes widened slightly, and how he held her hand just a moment longer than necessary. As the wagon pulled away from the station and headed toward the Mackenzie ranch, Isabella snuck glances at the man sitting beside her. This wasn't how she had expected to feel about her arranged marriage. She was supposed to be miserable, counting the days until she could go home. Instead, she found herself wondering what it would be like to really get to know Jake Mackenzie, this quiet, strong man who made her heart race with just one look. The Mackenzie ranch was like nothing Isabella had ever seen in her life. As their wagon rolled down the dirt road toward the main house, she tried not to let her mouth fall open in amazement. Rolling green hills stretched out in every direction, dotted with cattle and horses that looked like tiny toys from a distance. The sky was bigger than any sky had a right to be, painted in shades of blue that didn't even have names. "It's beautiful," she whispered, forgetting for a moment that she was supposed to be miserable about being here. Jake glanced at her, surprised by the genuine wonder in her voice. "You think so?" "Most city folks find it too empty." "Empty." Isabella shook her head. "It's not empty at all. It's free." Something in the way she said that word made Jake look at her more carefully. Maybe this fancy Boston lady wasn't exactly what he had expected after all. The ranch house was a large, 2-story building made of logs and stone, with a wide front porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It looked solid and welcoming, like it had been there forever and would stay there forever. Flower boxes under the windows had clearly been neglected for a while, and the porch could use a fresh coat of paint, but Isabella could see the potential. "Your mother's touch," Jake said, noticing where she was looking. "She died 3 years ago, and Dad and I, well, we're not much good with flowers and such." "I'm sorry," Isabella said softly. "That must have been very hard." Jake nodded, not trusting himself to say more. He had loved his mother deeply, and losing her had left a hole in their family that no one knew how to fill. Several ranch hands had gathered near the barn to get a look at Jake's new bride. Isabella could feel their curious stares as Jake helped her down from the wagon. She smoothed her skirt and tried to look confident even though she felt completely out of place. "Boys, this is Isabella," Jake announced. "Isabella, meet the crew." The men touched their hat brims politely and mumbled greetings, but Isabella could see the doubt in their eyes. They were wondering the same thing Jake was wondering. How long would this fancy city girl last before she ran back home crying? Isabella was determined to prove them all wrong. Her first morning on the ranch was a disaster. Isabella woke up at what she thought was early, 7 o'clock, only to discover that everyone else had been up since 5. By the time she made it to the kitchen, still wearing one of her silk nightgowns with a robe, Jake was finishing his breakfast. "Morning," he said, looking up from his coffee. His hair was damp from washing, and he smelled like soap and something that was purely male. Isabella felt her cheeks get warm. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said. "I'm not used to getting up so early." "No problem," Jake said, though she could tell he was making a mental note about city girls and their sleeping habits. "Mrs. Patterson from the neighboring ranch left some biscuits and eggs for you. She'll be helping out until you get settled." Isabella nodded, grateful for the kindness of neighbors she hadn't even met yet. "What time do you usually get up?" 5, sometimes 4:30 during busy seasons. Isabella tried not to look horrified. In Boston, she rarely saw 4:30 in the morning unless she was coming home from a very late party. After Jake left for the day's work, Isabella explored the house. It was bigger than it looked from outside, with a comfortable living room, a large kitchen, and several bedrooms upstairs. Everything was clean but clearly lacking a woman's touch. The curtains were practical rather than pretty, and there were no flowers or decorative touches anywhere. Isabella found herself imagining how she could improve things. New curtains in the kitchen, maybe some colorful cushions for the living room chairs, definitely something to brighten up the bare walls. Then she caught herself. This wasn't her real home. She was just here temporarily, until her father's political problems were solved. But as the days passed, Isabella found it harder to remember that this was supposed to be temporary. Her first attempt at helping with ranch work nearly ended in complete disaster. She insisted on helping Jake move some cattle from one pasture to another. Despite his obvious doubts about her riding ability, "I've been riding since I was 5, she told him confidently, conveniently forgetting to mention that her riding experience was limited to gentle trail rides in Boston parks. The horse Jake gave her was a calm, older mare named Buttercup. "She's gentle as a lamb," he assured Isabella. "Just sit tight and let her follow the other horses." Everything went fine until a rabbit jumped out of some bushes and spooked Buttercup. The mare shied sideways, and Isabella, who had never dealt with a truly frightened horse, lost her seat and tumbled right into a mud puddle. Jake was off his horse and helping her up before she could even process what had happened. His hands were warm and strong as he pulled her to her feet, and for a moment they stood very close together, both breathing hard. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. Isabella looked down at herself. Her borrowed jeans were covered in mud, her shirt was torn, and she probably had pondweeds in her hair. In Boston, this would have been a complete social disaster. Here, looking up into Jake's worried brown eyes, she started laughing. "I must look terrible," she said, wiping mud from her cheek. Jake stared at her for a moment. With her hair coming loose from its pins and mud streaked across her face, she looked nothing like the perfect lady who had stepped off the train. She looked real and alive and absolutely beautiful. "You look fine," he said quietly, and Isabella felt her heart skip a beat at the warmth in his voice. That evening, as Isabella soaked her sore muscles in a hot bath, she reflected on how different this life was from anything she had known. In Boston, her biggest worry had been choosing which dress to wear to which social event. Here, she was learning to take care of chickens, help with cooking for the ranch hands, and navigate a dozen daily challenges she had never imagined. It was hard work, harder than anything she had ever done. But it was also strangely satisfying. When she successfully collected eggs without getting pecked, or when she managed to help Jake repair a fence without dropping all the tools, she felt a sense of accomplishment that no charity luncheon had ever given her. More importantly, she was getting to know Jake Mackenzie, and what she discovered fascinated her. He was nothing like the men she had known in Boston. He didn't talk much, but when he did speak, his words meant something. He was patient with her mistakes, even when they cost him extra work. He treated his animals with genuine kindness, and his ranch hands clearly respected him. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit on the front porch and talk. Jake told her about growing up on the ranch, about his dreams of expanding the cattle operation, about his worry that he wasn't smart enough to handle the business side of things. Isabella shared stories about Boston, about the suffocating world of social expectations she had grown up in, about how she had always felt like she was playing a role rather than living her own life. "I've never told anyone that before," she admitted. One evening, as they watched, the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, why not? Jake asked. Isabella thought about it. "I guess I never met anyone who would understand." Jake looked at her then, really looked at her, and Isabella felt something shift between them. This wasn't just about an arranged marriage anymore. This wasn't just about fulfilling their father's agreement. Something real was growing between them, something that had nothing to do with duty or obligation, and everything to do with the way Jake's smile made her heart race, and the way Isabella's laughter made Jake feel like the luckiest man alive. Neither of them was ready to admit it yet, but they were both starting to realize that this arrangement might turn out to be the best thing that had ever happened to either of them. 3 weeks after Isabella arrived in Montana, it was time for the wedding. According to the legal papers their fathers had arranged, Jake needed to be married before his 30th birthday, which was only 2 days away, to inherit his grandfather's ranch. What was supposed to be a simple legal ceremony had somehow become something much more meaningful. Isabella stood in front of the small mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the simple white dress she had bought at the local general store. It wasn't anything like the elaborate wedding gown she had once imagined wearing. Instead of silk and lace and hundreds of pearls, this dress was made of plain cotton with tiny blue flowers embroidered around the neckline. It cost $12 and fit her perfectly. "You look beautiful," said Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor woman who had become like a mother to Isabella over the past few weeks. "That dress suits you much better than those fancy Boston things." Isabella smiled at her reflection. Mrs. Patterson was right. The simple dress made her look like herself, not like someone playing a role, but like the woman she was becoming here in Montana. Downstairs, she could hear the voices of neighbors who had come for the ceremony. Word had spread quickly through the small community about Jake's wedding, and it seemed like everyone wanted to meet his mysterious bride from Boston. Isabella had been nervous about fitting in, but the people here had welcomed her with a warmth she had never experienced in Boston's social circles. At the church, Jake was pacing nervously near the altar. He had borrowed a black suit from his father, and though it was a little too big for him, he looked handsome enough to make Isabella's heart skip a beat when she saw him. Pastor Williams, who had known Jake since he was born, smiled as Isabella walked down the short aisle. There were only about 20 people in the little wooden church, but their warm faces made Isabella feel more supported than she had ever felt at any grand Boston event. When Jake turned to watch her approach, Isabella saw something in his eyes that took her breath away. This wasn't the look of a man going through the motions of a business arrangement. This was the look of a man seeing the woman he wanted to spend his life with. "You look," Jake started to say when she reached him, then stopped, shaking his head. "You look perfect." Pastor Williams opened his worn Bible and began the ceremony. As he talked about love and commitment, about the importance of building a life together, Isabella found herself really listening to the words instead of just waiting for the ceremony to be over. When it came time for the vows, Jake surprised everyone by setting aside the traditional words Pastor Williams had prepared. "Isabella," he said, taking her hands in his, 3 weeks ago, "I thought I knew exactly what this marriage would be. A business arrangement to help us both out of difficult situations. But standing here now looking at you, I realize I was wrong." Isabella felt tears starting in her eyes as Jake continued. "You've brought light back into this house, laughter back into my days. You've worked harder than anyone expected, including me. You've made me remember what it feels like to look forward to coming home at the end of the day. I can't promise you fancy things or an easy life, but I can promise you that I will do everything in my power to make you happy you took a chance on this rough cowboy." Now Isabella was definitely crying, but they were happy tears. When it was her turn to speak, she had to take a deep breath before she could find her voice. "Jake, when I got on that train in Boston, I thought my life was over. I thought I was being sent away as punishment for making a mistake. But I was wrong too. Coming here, meeting you, learning to be part of this community, it hasn't been a punishment at all. It's been a gift. She squeezed his hands, gathering courage to say what was really in her heart. In Boston, I always felt like I was pretending to be someone else, trying to fit into a role that never quite fit right. Here with you, I feel like myself for the first time in my life. You've shown me what it means to work for something meaningful, to be part of something bigger than fancy parties and social expectations. I promise to be the best partner I can be in work and in life. When Pastor Williams told Jake he could kiss his bride, the kiss that followed was nothing like the polite peck Isabella had expected. Jake cupped her face in his hands and kissed her like he meant it, like she was precious to him, like he never wanted to let her go. The small congregation erupted in applause and cheers, and Isabella felt herself blushing as Jake finally pulled away, his eyes warm with something that looked a lot like love. The reception was held at the ranch house, with Mrs. Patterson and several other neighbor women providing food that was much better than anything Isabella had eaten at Boston's fanciest restaurants. There was fiddle music and dancing on the front porch, with lanterns strung up to provide light as the sun went down. Isabella had never been to a party where everyone seemed genuinely happy to be there. In Boston, social events always felt like performances where everyone was judging everyone else. Here people laughed freely, told stories, and treated Isabella like she had always been part of their community. When Jake asked her to dance, Isabella worried that her formal dance training wouldn't translate to the simple, joyful music the fiddler was playing. But Jake's strong hands guided her easily, and soon she was laughing as he spun her around the porch. "Having fun?" he asked, pulling her close during a slower song. "More fun than I've had in years," Isabella admitted. "These people are wonderful." "They like you," Jake said. "Mrs. Patterson told me she's never seen anyone adapt to ranch life as quickly as you have." Isabella felt a warm glow at the compliment. "I love it here, Jake. I never expected to, but I really do." Jake looked down at her, his expression serious. "Even though it's not what you're used to? Even though it's hard work and simple living?" "Especially because of that," Isabella said. "For the first time in my life, I feel like what I do matters." In Boston, my biggest accomplishment was organizing charity events where rich people gave money to feel good about themselves. Here, when I help you with the cattle or take care of the chickens, I'm actually contributing something real. As the evening wore on and the neighbors began to head home, Isabella found herself reluctant for the night to end. She had never felt so completely happy, so perfectly in the right place at the right time. When Jake walked her upstairs, to her bedroom, they had agreed to continue, sleeping separately until they both felt ready for more. He paused at her. "Dora Isabella," he said softly, "I want you to know that what I said during the ceremony, I meant every word. This marriage might have started as an arrangement, but for me it's become something real." Isabella's heart raced as she looked up into his warm brown eyes. "For me too," she whispered. Jake smiled then, the kind of smile that lit up his whole face. "Good night, Mrs. Mackenzie." "Good night, husband," Isabella replied, testing out the word and finding that she liked how it sounded. As she got ready for bed, Isabella caught sight of herself in the mirror again. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had left Boston just 3 weeks ago. This woman looked happy, confident, like she belonged exactly where she was. For the first time since leaving Boston, Isabella didn't spend any time thinking about when she might go back. Instead, she found herself hoping that her father's political troubles would take a very long time to resolve, because she was beginning to think that Montana might be exactly where she belonged. Outside her window, she could hear Jake moving around in his room, and the sound made her smile. Tomorrow they would wake up as husband and wife, and while Isabella didn't know exactly what that would mean for them, she was excited to find out. What had started as a punishment was turning into the greatest adventure of her life. Autumn in Montana was like nothing Isabella had ever experienced. The rolling hills turned gold and crimson. The air became crisp and clean, and every morning brought breathtaking views that made her grateful to be alive. As the leaves changed colors, so did Isabella's life as she and Jake settled into married life with surprising ease. The first thing Isabella tackled was transforming the ranch house into a real home. For 3 years since Jake's mother had died, the house had been clean but cold, functional but not welcoming. Isabella changed all of that. She started with the kitchen, sewing bright yellow curtains to replace the plain brown ones that had hung there forever. She planted herbs in small pots on the windowsill, basil, rosemary, and thyme that made the whole room smell wonderful when she cooked. Jake came in one evening to find her standing on a chair, hanging a cheerful painting of sunflowers that she had bought in town. "Careful there," he said, steadying the chair with his hands. "I don't want my wife breaking her neck over decorating." The way he said "my wife" made Isabella's heart flutter. They were still sleeping in separate bedrooms, still learning how to be married, but moments like this made it feel more real every day. "Do you like it?" she asked, stepping down from the chair to admire her work. Jake looked at the painting, then at the bright curtains, then at the way the late afternoon sun streamed through the clean windows and made everything glow. "It looks like a home," he said simply, and Isabella knew that was the highest compliment he could give. Isabella's organizational skills, sharpened by years of managing Boston charity events, proved invaluable for ranch business. Jake had always been good with the cattle and horses, but paperwork and financial planning made him nervous. Isabella dove into the account books and business records with enthusiasm. "Jake, look at this," she said one evening, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "If we invest in better breeding stock this year, we could increase our profits by 30% over the next 3 years. Jake sat down beside her, amazed by the neat charts and calculations she had created. "How did you figure all this out?" "I managed the budget for the Boston Children's Hospital Charity Gala for 5 years, Isabella said. "We raised over $1 million each year, which means tracking expenses, projecting income, negotiating with vendors. Ranch business isn't so different, just with cattle instead of fancy dinner parties." As autumn deepened, Jake began teaching Isabella to ride properly. Her disaster with Buttercup had convinced them both that she needed real riding lessons if she was going to be a ranch wife. "The key is confidence," Jake told her as they stood in the corral with Honey, a gentle Palomino mare. "Horses can sense fear, but they also respond to calm leadership." Isabella tried to project confidence as she approached Honey, but her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for the reins. Jake stepped up behind her, his body warm against her back as he covered her hands with his own. "Like this," he said softly, guiding her hands to the correct position. "Feel how she responds when you hold the reins firmly but gently?" Isabella could barely concentrate on the horse when Jake was standing so close. His breath was warm against her ear, and she could smell his soap mixed with the outdoor scents of leather and hay. When he stepped away, she immediately missed his warmth, but the riding lessons worked. Within a few weeks, Isabella was confident enough to ride out with Jake to check on the cattle. She loved these rides across the open range, loved the feeling of freedom and the amazing views from horseback. "I never imagined I could feel so free," she told Jake one afternoon as they paused to rest the horses on a hilltop overlooking the valley. "In Boston, I felt trapped all the time by expectations, by schedules, by what other people thought I should be doing." Jake studied her face, noting the healthy color in her cheeks from the fresh air and sunshine, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about something that excited her. "Do you miss it? The parties and fancy clothes and all that?" Isabella thought about it seriously. "I miss my friends sometimes, and there are things about city life that were convenient. But miss the life I had there? No. That wasn't really living, Jake. It was just existing." Their conversations during these rides and during quiet evenings at home revealed depths in both of them that surprised the other. Jake talked about his dreams for the ranch, his worry that he wasn't educated enough to handle the business side of things, his fear that he could never give Isabella the sophisticated life she was used to. "Jake Mackenzie," Isabella said firmly one evening as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset, "you are one of the smartest men I've ever met. You understand animals, weather, land management, and a dozen other things that can't be learned from books. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you're not educated enough." Jake looked at her with such gratitude and affection that Isabella's breath caught. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked quietly. "We both got lucky," Isabella replied, and meant it. Physical affection between them grew naturally and gradually. It started with Jake taking her hand when they walked, or Isabella touching his arm when she wanted his attention. Then there were the moments when Jake would help her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary, or when Isabella would brush dust from his shirt after a long day of work, her fingers gentle against his chest. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fireplace reading, Jake working through a cattle breeding manual while Isabella read a novel Mrs. Patterson had lent her. Isabella looked up to find Jake watching her instead of reading. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," Jake said, but he kept looking at her with an expression that made her feel warm all over. "I was just thinking how right you look there. Like you've always belonged in that chair by that fireplace." Isabella set down her book and moved to the couch where Jake was sitting. "I feel like I belong here," she said softly. "Not just in this house, but with you." Jake set aside his manual and turned to face her fully. "Isabella, I need you to know something. This marriage, what we have together, it's not just convenience for me anymore. I'm falling in love with you. Actually, I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day at the train station." Isabella's heart raced as she looked into his sincere brown eyes. "I love you too, Jake. I think I knew it the day I fell off Buttercup and you looked so worried about me. No one had ever looked at me like that before, like I really mattered." When Jake kissed her this time, it was different from their wedding kiss. This was the kiss of two people who had chosen each other, who were building something real together. Isabella felt like she was coming home. Later that night, for the first time since their wedding, Isabella didn't go to her separate bedroom. Instead, she stayed with Jake, and they talked until dawn about their hopes and dreams, about the life they wanted to build together. "I want to expand the ranch," Jake told her, his arm around her as she curled against his side. "Maybe add some breeding horses along with the cattle. And I want to build you a proper house, something worthy of a lady like you." "This house is perfect," Isabella said. "All it needed was someone to make it feel like home. Besides, I'm not a Boston lady anymore, Jake. I'm a ranch wife, and I love being a ranch wife." As winter approached, Isabella and Jake settled into routines that felt as natural as breathing. They worked together during the day, shared meals and conversation in the evenings, and fell asleep in each other's arms at night. Isabella had never imagined that marriage could be such a partnership, such a blending of two lives into something stronger than either had been alone. When the first snow began to fall in early November, Isabella stood at the kitchen window watching the flakes dust the mountains in the distance. Jake came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Isabella leaned back against his chest, feeling safe and loved and exactly where she belonged. "Only one," she said. Jake tensed slightly. "What's that?" Isabella turned in his arms and smiled up at him. "I regret that it took a scandal to bring me here. I wish I had found you sooner." Jake's smile was brighter than the snow-covered mountains. "Well, I've got you now," he said, "and I'm never letting you go." As Isabella kissed her husband in their warm kitchen while snow fell softly outside, she thought about how dramatically her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been playing a role in someone else's idea of what her life should be. Now she was living her own life, building her own dreams with a man who loved her for exactly who she was. It turned out that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as punishments. Isabella was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she saw the fancy black carriage coming up the road. Her heart sank immediately. She recognized that carriage. It belonged to her family back in Boston. The only person who would travel all the way to Montana in such style was her mother. "Jake," she called, her voice tight with worry. Jake came running from the barn, probably thinking something was wrong with the animals. When he saw the approaching carriage, his expression grew serious. "Family?" he asked. "My mother," Isabella said, unconsciously smoothing her simple work dress. After months of wearing practical clothes and doing honest work, she had forgotten how different her life was now from the one her mother expected her to live. Catherine Hartford stepped out of the carriage looking like she had traveled through a war zone. Her expensive traveling dress was wrinkled, her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and she wore the expression of someone who had endured great suffering. "Isabella," she said dramatically, rushing forward with her arms outstretched. "My poor dear child, look what this place has done to you." Isabella looked down at herself, confused. She was wearing a simple blue dress that she had sewn herself, with an apron to protect it while she worked. Her hands were a little rough from ranch work, and she had a light tan from spending time outdoors. She thought she looked healthy and happy. "Hello, Mother," she said, accepting the hug while trying not to wince at her mother's strong perfume. After months of fresh mountain air, the heavy scent seemed overwhelming. Catherine held Isabella at arm's length, studying her with horror. "You're so thin. And brown. Isabella, you look like a common farm girl. Jake stepped forward, removing his hat politely. Mrs. Hartford, I'm Jake Mackenzie. Welcome to our ranch. Catherine barely glanced at him. Yes, Mr. Mackenzie, I'm sure you're very nice. Now, Isabella, we need to pack your things immediately. Your father has wonderful news. Pack my things? Isabella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Mother, what are you talking about? The election, dear. Your father won by a landslide. He's the governor now, and all that nasty business from last year is completely forgotten. No one even remembers that silly scandal anymore. Isabella felt Jake tense beside her. They had both known this day might come, but somehow it had felt far away, like something that might never actually happen. That's wonderful news about father, Isabella said carefully. But I don't understand about packing. Catherine laughed as if Isabella had made a joke. Well, naturally you'll come home now. The whole point of this arrangement was to keep you out of sight until the election was over. Now that your father is governor, he needs his family by his side. There are social obligations, political events. He's already arranged for you to be presented at the governor's ball next month. But Mother, Isabella said, her voice getting stronger, this is my home now. Jake is my husband. Catherine waved a dismissive hand. Oh, that. Well, I'm sure we can arrange a quiet divorce once you're back in Boston. No one needs to know about this little adventure. Jake's face had gone very still, the way it did when he was trying to control strong emotions. Isabella could see the hurt in his eyes even though he was trying to hide it. Mother, you don't understand, Isabella said firmly. I don't want a divorce. I love Jake and I love my life here. Love? Catherine looked genuinely shocked. Isabella, dear, this isn't about love. This is about your future, your position in society. You can't possibly be serious about staying here permanently. She gestured around at the ranch, at the simple house and the wide open spaces, as if they were something distasteful. Look at this place. It's so rustic, and what about children? You can't possibly want to raise children in the middle of nowhere. Isabella felt anger rising in her chest. This isn't the middle of nowhere, Mother. This is a working ranch, a business that Jake has built into something successful and respected. The people here are kind and genuine, not like the fake politicians and society people back home. Isabella, Catherine looked scandalized. How can you speak about your father's friends that way? These people have been very worried about you. No, they haven't, Isabella said with sudden clarity. They've been worried about the scandal I caused, about how it might affect them. They don't care about me as a person. Jake finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Mrs. Hartford, maybe you should come inside and rest after your long journey. We can discuss this more calmly. Catherine finally really looked at Jake, taking in his simple clothes and weathered hands. I'm sure you're a perfectly nice man, Mr. Mackenzie, but you must understand that Isabella belongs in a different world. She's educated, cultured, used to fine things. This marriage was always meant to be temporary. Maybe that's what it was meant to be, Jake said, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. But that's not what it became. That evening, after Catherine had been settled in the guest room, Isabella and Jake sat on the front porch in tense silence. The easy comfort they had built together felt fragile suddenly, threatened by the reminder of Isabella's other life. She's not entirely wrong, you know, Jake said finally. You do belong to a different world. You gave up a lot to come here. I didn't give up anything important, Isabella said quickly. Jake, you can't seriously think I would choose that life over this one. But what if you should? Jake's voice was quiet, pained. What if I've been selfish, keeping you here when you could have so much more? Isabella turned to face him fully. More what? More empty parties? More fake friendships? More pretending to be someone I'm not? More security, Jake said. More comfort. Education for our children. Culture, opportunities. Jake Mackenzie. If you think I'm going to leave you for fancy dresses and boring dinner parties, you don't know me at all. But even as she said it, Isabella could see the doubt in Jake's eyes. Her mother's arrival had reminded them both that they came from very different worlds, and that Isabella's presence on the ranch was still dependent on family arrangements that could change. The next morning brought more unwelcome news. Jake came back from town looking grim, a telegram in his hand. What is it? Isabella asked, though she could tell from his expression that it wasn't good. Drought warnings for next year, Jake said, and cattle prices are dropping. The bank manager wants to meet with me next week about the loan. Isabella felt her stomach drop. How bad is it? Bad enough, Jake said. We might lose the ranch, Isabella. We might lose everything. That afternoon, as Isabella helped Jake review the financial papers, she overheard him talking to his foreman near the barn. Maybe the lady would be better off back in Boston, the foreman was saying. At least there she'd be taken care of if things go bad here. Maybe, Jake replied, and Isabella felt her heart break a little at the resignation in his voice. That night, Catherine cornered Isabella in the kitchen while Jake was out checking on the animals. "I can see you care about him," her mother said, her voice gentler than it had been. "But caring isn't enough, Isabella. What kind of life can he really give you? You've seen the financial problems. What happens when you have children? What opportunities will they have out here?" Isabella tried to argue, but her mother's words planted seeds of doubt that she couldn't quite shake. She loved Jake desperately, loved the life they had built together. But what if her mother was right? What if she was being selfish, clinging to happiness that might not last? When Jake came in later, Isabella was staring out the kitchen window at the dark mountains. "You're thinking about leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. Isabella didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. Jake sat down heavily at the kitchen table, suddenly looking older than his 30 years. "Maybe you should," he said quietly. "Maybe that would be best for both of us." "Don't say that," Isabella whispered, but they both knew that everything had changed. The safe, happy world they had built together suddenly felt fragile, threatened by forces beyond their control. Outside pressures were pulling them apart, making them doubt what they knew in their hearts to be true. Isabella loved Jake and loved her life on the ranch, but the weight of her family's expectations and the uncertainty of their financial future made everything feel uncertain. For the first time since arriving in Montana, Isabella found herself wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Not in loving Jake. That would never be a mistake. But in believing that love would be enough to overcome all the obstacles that stood between them and their happiness. As she lay awake that night, listening to Jake's troubled breathing beside her, Isabella realized that their greatest test was just beginning. The blizzard came 3 weeks earlier than anyone expected, hitting the ranch with a fury that took everyone by surprise. Isabella woke to Jake shaking her shoulder urgently, his face tense with worry. "Isabella, get up. We've got a problem." Outside, the wind was howling like a living thing, and snow was falling so hard that Isabella couldn't see past the front porch. The temperature had dropped 30 degrees overnight, and the cattle that had been grazing in the far pasture were now trapped by the sudden storm. "How many head are out there?" Isabella asked, pulling on her warmest clothes as quickly as she could. "Nearly 200, Jake said grimly. "If we don't get them to shelter soon, we could lose most of them. That would finish us for sure." Isabella's mother appeared in the doorway, wrapped in an expensive silk robe and looking horrified. "Surely you're not going out in this weather. It's far too dangerous." "Those cattle represent everything we've worked for," Jake said, pulling on his heavy coat. "I have to try to save them." "Then I'm coming with you," Isabella said, reaching for her own coat. "Absolutely not," Jake said firmly. "It's too dangerous, Isabella. The visibility is almost zero, and the cold could kill you if you get lost out there." Isabella felt a flash of anger. "I'm not some helpless city girl anymore, Jake. I know this ranch as well as anyone, and those cattle are as much mine as they are yours." "Isabella, please," her mother said. "Listen to your husband. A lady doesn't go out in such terrible weather." But Isabella wasn't listening to her mother anymore. She was looking at Jake, seeing the fear and desperation in his eyes, knowing that he was facing the possible loss of everything his family had built. "I'm going," she said quietly but firmly. "You need all the help you can get, and I'm not going to sit here safe and warm while you risk your life alone." Jake grabbed her shoulders, his grip almost painful in his urgency. "Isabella, if something happened to you out there, I couldn't live with myself. Please just stay here where it's safe. And if something happens to you, how am I supposed to live with that?" Isabella shot back. "We're partners, Jake. That means we face the dangerous times together, not just the easy ones." Their argument was interrupted by Tom, the ranch foreman, bursting through the front door with snow covering his coat and ice in his beard. "Jake, we need to move now," he said urgently. "The storm's getting worse and the cattle are starting to panic. If we wait much longer, they'll scatter and we'll never find them all." Jake looked at Isabella one more time, torn between his need for help and his fear for her safety. Isabella met his gaze steadily, letting him see her determination. I'm going, Jake, she said again. You can waste time arguing with me, or you can accept that I'm coming and tell me what needs to be done. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. Stay close to me at all times, he said. If I tell you to do something, you do it immediately, no questions. Promise me. I promise, Isabella said. Her mother made one last desperate attempt. Isabella, this is madness. You could be killed out there. Come back to Boston with me today before something terrible happens. Isabella looked at her mother, then at Jake, and realized that this was the moment of truth. She could choose safety and comfort, or she could choose love and partnership, even when it meant facing danger. No, Mother, she said firmly. My place is here with my husband, facing whatever comes together. The ride out to the trapped cattle was like riding through a nightmare. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked Isabella from her horse several times, and the snow was falling so heavily that she could barely see Jake riding just a few feet ahead of her. The cold bit through her heavy clothes and made her face ache, but Isabella pushed through the discomfort, focused on staying close to Jake and the other ranch hands as they fought their way toward the distant pasture. She had never been so cold or so scared in her life, but she had also never been more certain that she was exactly where she belonged. When they finally reached the cattle, the situation was even worse than Jake had feared. The animals were huddled together in panic, some already showing signs of hypothermia. Several calves had become separated from their mothers and were in immediate danger. We need to move them toward the lower pasture, Jake shouted over the wind. There's an old line shack there that will provide some shelter. For the next several hours, Isabella and the ranch hands worked desperately to move the frightened cattle through the blinding snow. Isabella had never worked so hard in her life, pushing through exhaustion and cold that made her bones ache. Her hands were numb inside her gloves and her face felt like it was made of ice. But gradually they began to make progress. The cattle, sensing the humans were trying to help them, started moving in the right direction. Isabella rode alongside Jake, helping to guide stragglers and keep the herd together. That's when disaster struck. A sudden gust of wind spooked Isabella's horse, causing the animal to shy sideways just as they were crossing a small ravine. In the whiteout conditions, Isabella didn't see the drop-off until it was too late. Her horse stumbled, and Isabella felt herself falling through the swirling snow. She hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her left arm as she rolled down the small embankment. Above her she could hear Jake shouting her name, but the wind carried his voice away almost immediately. Isabella tried to stand, but discovered that her left arm wouldn't work properly. She was also completely disoriented, unable to see more than a few feet in any direction. The snow was falling so heavily that her own horse had already disappeared from view. For the first time since the crisis began, Isabella felt real fear. She was injured, lost, and alone in a blizzard that could easily kill her. The temperature was dropping fast, and she knew that if she didn't find shelter soon, she might not survive the night. But even as panic threatened to overwhelm her, Isabella forced herself to think clearly. She remembered Jake's lessons about surviving in bad weather, about staying calm and making smart decisions. She found a cluster of rocks that provided some shelter from the wind and settled down to wait, hoping that Jake would find her before it was too late. Meanwhile, Jake was going half crazy with worry and fear. When Isabella's horse had returned without her, he had immediately turned back to search for his wife, leaving the other ranch hands to finish moving the cattle. Isabella, he shouted into the wind, his voice raw from calling her name. Isabella, where are you? Jake had never been so terrified in his life. The thought of losing Isabella, especially after their argument about her safety, was unbearable. She had been right to come with him. They needed every person they could get to save the cattle. But if something happened to her because he had allowed it, he would never forgive himself. As the hours passed and the storm grew worse, Jake's search became increasingly desperate. He rode in ever-widening circles, calling Isabella's name until his voice gave out, praying to find some sign of her before the cold claimed her life. It was nearly dark when he finally spotted a flash of red fabric among the rocks. Isabella's scarf, barely visible through the swirling snow. Isabella, he called, jumping from his horse and scrambling down the embankment. He found her huddled against the rocks, semi-conscious from cold and pain, but alive. Her left arm was clearly injured and her lips were blue from the cold, but she was breathing. Jake, she whispered as he gathered her into his arms. Did we save them? Did we save the cattle? Even injured and half frozen, her first thought was for the ranch and their shared responsibilities. In that moment, Jake realized beyond any doubt that Isabella belonged here with him, that she was truly his partner in every sense of the word. We saved them, he told her, wrapping his coat around her and holding her close. Thanks to you, we saved them all. As Jake carefully helped Isabella back to his horse, both of them knew that something fundamental had changed between them. They had faced a real crisis together, and their bond had not only survived but had grown stronger. Isabella had chosen to stay and fight for their life together, even when it meant risking her safety. Jake had seen that she truly was his equal partner, someone who would stand by him no matter what challenges they faced. The ride back to the ranch house was slow and careful, with Isabella fighting to stay conscious despite her injuries and exhaustion. But as they finally saw the lights of home through the snow, both of them knew that they had passed a crucial test. They had proven to themselves and to each other that their love was strong enough to weather any storm, literally and figuratively. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as true partners in love and life. The blizzard that had threatened to destroy everything had instead shown them exactly how much they meant to each other and how strong their bond really was. Spring came to Montana like a promise being kept. The snow melted to reveal green grass pushing through the earth, and wildflowers began blooming across the rolling hills. Isabella stood at the kitchen window, her left arm still in a sling from the blizzard 3 months ago, watching Jake work with the new calves in the corral. Her heart swelled with love and pride as she saw how carefully he handled each animal. The winter had been hard, but they had survived it together. More than survived, they had thrived. The cattle they had saved during the blizzard had made it through the rest of the winter in good condition, and the early spring had brought excellent news about cattle prices. The drought warnings had turned out to be false, and the ranch was actually in better financial shape than it had been in years, thanks in large part to Isabella's business management skills. Isabella, dear, her mother said, coming into the kitchen with a cup of tea. Catherine Hartford had extended her stay through the winter, and the experience had changed her as much as it had changed Isabella. During Isabella's recovery from her injuries, Catherine had been forced to help with household tasks for the first time in her privileged life. She had learned to cook simple meals, had helped tend to Isabella's needs, and had gradually begun to understand what her daughter's life was really like. I've been thinking, Catherine continued, about what you said during that terrible storm. About choosing love and partnership over safety and comfort. Isabella turned from the window, curious. Her relationship with her mother had improved greatly over the winter months, but Catherine still struggled sometimes to understand Isabella's choices. I think I owe you an apology, Catherine said quietly. And I owe your husband one too. I came here thinking I was rescuing you from a terrible mistake. Instead, I discovered that you had found something I never had in my own marriage. What do you mean? Isabella asked gently. A real partnership, Catherine said. Your father is a good man, but our marriage has always been about social expectations and political advantages. We've never been true partners the way you and Jake are. Watching you two together, seeing how you support each other and face challenges as a team, it's made me realize what I've been missing. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. Oh, Mother, you were right to stay, Catherine said firmly. This is where you belong, with a man who loves you for who you truly are, not for what you can do for his career or social standing. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching. Isabella looked out to see her father's carriage coming up the road, followed by a smaller wagon. Senator Hartford, now Governor Hartford, had finally come to Montana to see his daughter's new life for himself. Jake came in from the corral, quickly washing his hands and smoothing his hair. Despite everything they had been through together, he was still nervous about impressing Isabella's father. It'll be fine, Isabella assured him, straightening his collar. Just be yourself. That's all I need you to be. Governor Hartford stepped out of his carriage looking every inch the successful politician, but his expression was curious rather than disapproving as he looked around the ranch. The months since the election had been good to him, and Isabella could see that he was more relaxed than she had seen him in years. Isabella, he said, embracing his daughter warmly. You look wonderful, sweetheart. Healthy and happy. I am happy, Daddy, Isabella said. Happier than I've ever been. Governor Hartford turned to Jake, extending his hand. Mr. Mackenzie, thank you for taking such good care of my daughter. She takes pretty good care of herself, sir, Jake replied, shaking the governor's hand firmly. And she's taken excellent care of all of us here. The man who climbed down from the second wagon surprised everyone. It was Thomas Patterson, a banker from Boston whom Governor Hartford had brought with him for reasons that soon became clear. Isabella. Jake, Governor Hartford said, Mr. Patterson has a business proposition for you. It seems your success here has attracted some attention back east. Over dinner that evening, Mr. Patterson explained his offer. A group of Boston investors wanted to partner with the Mackenzie Ranch to supply beef to the growing eastern markets. They were offering a significant investment that would allow Jake and Isabella to expand their operation considerably. It's a generous offer, Jake said carefully, but we'd want to maintain control of our operation. We're not interested in becoming employees of some eastern corporation. Of course, Mr. Patterson said. The investors are looking for partners, not employees. They've been impressed by your business reports, he nodded to Isabella, and your reputation for quality cattle. They want to invest in success, not take it over. Governor Hartford leaned forward. There's something else, Isabella. The investors would like you to serve as their Western representative, managing their interests in several ranches throughout Montana and Wyoming. It would mean significant income and the opportunity to help other ranchers succeed. Isabella looked at Jake, seeing the excitement in his eyes. This was everything they had dreamed of, the opportunity to expand their ranch while helping others do the same. We'll need to discuss it, Isabella said, but it sounds very promising. Later that evening, as the family gathered on the front porch to watch the sunset, Governor Hartford pulled Isabella aside. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. When I sent you here, I thought I was punishing you for embarrassing the family. I never imagined I was giving you the greatest gift of your life. You couldn't have known, Isabella said. I didn't know it myself until I got here. Jake Mackenzie is a good man, her father continued. He loves you in a way that Richard Pemberton never could have, and you've become a stronger, more capable woman than I ever imagined possible. Isabella felt tears of gratitude and joy. Does this mean you approve of my choice to stay? More than approve, Governor Hartford said. I'm proud of you, Isabella, proud of the life you've built, and the woman you've become. The next morning brought one more surprise. Dr. Mitchell from town arrived at the ranch with news that made Isabella's heart race. Mrs. Mackenzie, he said with a smile, I have the results of the tests we ran last week. Congratulations, you're going to have a baby. Isabella felt the world spin around her as Jake whooped with joy and swept her into his arms, careful of her still healing arm. A baby, their baby, to grow up on this beautiful ranch, surrounded by love and wide-open spaces. When? Jake asked, his voice full of wonder. Early fall, I'd say, Dr. Mitchell replied. October, maybe November. That afternoon, Isabella and Jake walked hand in hand to their favorite spot on the hill overlooking the valley. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, painted in shades of purple and gold by the setting sun. Can you believe all this? Isabella asked, settling down beside Jake on the blanket they had brought. A year ago, I was a scandal-ridden society girl being shipped off to marry a stranger. Now look at us. Jake pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach where their child was growing. I used to think arranged marriages were just business deals, he said. I never imagined one could turn into the greatest love story of my life. Isabella turned in his arms to face him. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't kissed Richard Pemberton that night? If there had been no scandal to send me away? Jake considered this seriously. I think we would have found each other somehow, he said finally. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe we would have met under different circumstances. But I believe we were meant to be together. I love you, Jake Mackenzie, Isabella said, the words carrying all the depth of feeling that had grown between them over the months of learning to trust, to work together, to face challenges as a team. I love you too, Mrs. Mackenzie, Jake replied, kissing her softly. Forever and always. As autumn approached and Isabella's pregnancy progressed, she established the school she had been dreaming about. With her father's political connections and the Eastern investors' financial backing, she created a small school for the children of ranch families throughout the area. It was housed in a new building on the Mackenzie property, and Isabella taught the children herself, combining traditional academics with practical skills they would need for frontier life. The school was exactly the kind of meaningful work Isabella had always wanted to do. Work that made a real difference in people's lives, that helped children build better futures for themselves. On a crisp October morning, as Isabella stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse watching her students work on their lessons, she felt Jake's arms come around her from behind. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his hands resting on her noticeably rounded belly. "Perfect," Isabella said, leaning back against his strong chest. Absolutely perfect, she meant it. Everything about her life felt exactly right. The work she was doing, the man she was married to, the child they were expecting, the community they had helped build together. Even her relationship with her parents had healed and grown stronger. "Any regrets?" Jake asked, echoing the question he had asked her that first winter when snow began to fall. Isabella turned in his arms, looking up into the warm brown eyes that had captured her heart from that very first day at the train station. "Only one," she said, just as she had before. "What's that?" Jake asked, though he was smiling now, knowing what her answer would be.